In 2008, the Indian government announced the launch of an identity card drive and promised that within a decade, every citizen would be provided with a unique ID number. That number in question was linked to an individual's biometric data, fingerprints and iris scans, and over 1 billion Indians have now received their cards. But today the government is going a step further by linking many social welfare schemes to this massive biometric database. For example, a person can be given access to a fuel subsidy with a simple fingerprint check. The aim of the scheme is to reduce corruption and misappropriation of public funds by middlemen, but also to increase digital transparency in commercial transactions. However, some are asking whether this is a case of too much government regulation, and privacy advocates are calling this the world's largest mass surveillance project.
Over 1 million people live in Old Delhi. Mohammad Taushif reckons he's met most of them. A chicken seller by day, he uses his shop every evening to enroll citizens into what has become the world's largest identification program. Launched in 2008, Aadhaar aims to provide an identification number to each of India's 1.3 billion people. It also records every individual's fingerprints and iris scans for the government's massive database.
Okay, now put the fingers of your right hand.
In a country where many people don't have any identity document, this is a revolution.
I want to enroll my 3-year-old daughter in school. They told me I can't do it without my Aadhaar card, so I desperately need it.
The government has now made Aadhaar mandatory for availing subsidies on food and fuel, for opening bank accounts and for getting a mobile phone connection. It's hoped that soon most commercial transactions will be done using Aadhaar-based applications. Taushif also believes it will eradicate another menace.
Crime will also decrease because of this. If someone commits a crime and he leaves behind a fingerprint, and if he also has an Aadhaar card or registration, then he will be easily caught.
Not everyone agrees with him. Aruna Roy, one of the most prominent social activists in the country, is a crucial member of the small but vocal anti-Aadhaar movement.
What do you think?
Like you talking about how the problem with Aadhaar being used for mass surveillance and it becoming like a Big Brother project.
Because Big Brother is not watching you in a room through a television, but is watching through the biometric system and through Aadhaar and through data. Every single thing you do, where you go, when you buy a ticket, when you buy a gas for your cooking, when you are going to the bank, when you do a bank transaction, your calls are all monitored. So what is left? So it's a complete invasion of privacy.
Students in Puerto Rico will be experiencing the economic crisis there firsthand. Officials say 184 public schools will shut down at the end of the month, which is expected to save millions of dollars. This is the largest mass school closure in the island's history. In another historic move, the U.S. territory declared bankruptcy a few days ago. Officials say the 27,000 students whose schools are closing will all be relocated.
In the Altamira neighborhood of the Venezuelan capital of Caracas, anti-government protesters poured into the streets of this once bustling commercial and residential hub, their young faces obscured by tear gas, masks, and bandanas. On Wednesday, protesters hurled rocks and Molotov cocktails at riot police who responded to the almost daily demonstrations, calling for President Nicolas Maduro to step down. At least 35 people have died and over 700 have been injured in protests in the last month alone, according to the Venezuelan prosecutor's office. Half the deaths occurred in the capital of a country sunk deep in economic crisis and political instability. The victims have included 4 teenagers, a National Guard member, and a police officer.
It's far from a normal trading day in Abidjan's Roxy Market. Dozens of police officers seized truckloads of fake painkillers, antibiotics, and vitamins with the support of Ivorian healthcare professionals.
We've decided this morning to come and really put an end to these activities by seizing the fake drugs.
Fake drugs are usually out of date and often do not contain the active ingredient for treatment. Authorities in Ivory Coast are clamping down on the practice, and in March they destroyed 50 tons of fake medicines worth more than $1 billion. Fake drugs industry accounts for 10% of the world's pharmaceutical market. 1/3 of all medicine used in Africa is either illegal or counterfeit, with most of these fake drugs coming from China. In Ivory Coast, street pharmacies cost the legal drug sector $85 billion each year. And while the raid on Roxy Market was welcomed by many, some complain it's taken away the livelihoods of many women without offering any alternative.
Nobody is ready to help us, but women here are used to selling all of this. If you tell them to stop selling those pills, there isn't much else to sell. What are they going to do?
The UN says vital antibiotics sold legally in the Ivory Coast can cost up to $80 per tablet, but are available on the street for as little as 25 cents. And until legal medicines are more affordable, fake medicines will continue to find its way down the throats of the most vulnerable.
In Western Indonesia, at least 200 inmates have broken out of an overcrowded jail. The incident occurred when guards allowed inmates to take part in Friday prayers in the Muslim-majority nation. At least 80 inmates have been recaptured, but hundreds of police are still searching for those on the run. Officials say the jail has a capacity of around 700, but was housing around 1,800.
Well, a city in Pennsylvania is removing a park bench with a religious quote in order to placate angry atheists. A public park in Oil City features a bench which was donated in 2003 by the local branch of the VFW. The bench bears the phrase, "Men who aren't governed by God will be governed by tyrants." Nobody seemed to be bothered by the bench until the secular lobby struck. American Atheists sent a letter demanding the removal of the bench, and the town complied, fearing the cost of litigation if they didn't. Amanda Knief is the National Legal Director of American Atheists, and she joins us tonight. Amanda, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So people who aren't governed by God will be governed by tyrants. Aren't you the tyrant in this story?
I think we are the folks that fight for equality for everyone. And when this bench was put with a veterans memorial, it was demeaning to anyone who's a non-Christian veteran.
Well, it's not just Christians who believe in God. Virtually everyone but you and the Buddhists believe in God. So why just Christians?
So about 25% of military enlistment either claim no religious preference or are atheist or agnostic.
So the idea is that the word God is offensive. Just the appearance of the word God is so offensive to those
not
who
the
don't
word
believe in
God,
God.
but the fact that, you know, assuming that if you're not a religious person or a Christo-Judeo person, that you're going to be governed by tyrants, dismisses the morality and the compassion that many of our veterans and our soldiers have. But just because they don't believe in God doesn't mean that they're not good people.
Nobody's suggesting that. Look, this is a park bench in a town that's down on its luck. It's lost population for almost 50 years. It's not a rich place at all. And you come in with a well-funded group and say, do what we want or we'll crush you in court. And they say...
That is not what we did.
Well, sure, that's
no,
what they
isn't.
say you did.
Well, if you look at the first letter we sent, first of all, we got a complaint. It wasn't like we just went looking for this.
Who was the complaint from?
It was from a resident in the city.
Who?
I'm not going to say his name. He wants to remain confidential.
So on the basis of an anonymous complaint, someone can come forward without even giving his name and just say, I don't like this.
Well, we know their name, but then what we do is we research it.
But don't the residents... Look, you don't live in Oil City.
If we had gone to litigation, he would have come forward.
They had a park bench. Okay, so one guy who doesn't even have the courage to stand up and reveal his identity gets to control the entire existence of this park bench in a city of 10,000.
Covers.
Word from North Korea is accusing South Korea and the CIA of trying to assassinate its leader and dictator, Kim Jong-un.
According to the North Korean state media today, Kim Jong-un was supposed to have been targeted while attending a huge military parade held last month on the anniversary of the birth date of his grandfather, the founder of the country, Kim Il-sung, which we happened to attend. The story goes that the CIA and the South Korean counterpart agency turned a North Korean fellow while he was abroad, paid him off, geared him up with some kind of a satellite communications device, and then armed him with a dirty bomb containing some kind of radioactive material. He was going to use that to kill Kim Jong-un at that very public event. Again, we were there. We can attest that security was quite tight. They're always looking, for example, for any kind of like an iPhone or an iPad that might have a GPS homing device, I guess, playing into that concept. We were about 200, 300 yards from the guy. We can tell you that nothing happened on that day. Those claimed to have been involved so far have not had any comment on this bill.
And apparently North Korea has released some new images of Kim Jong-un. What do we see of him?
Exactly. Yeah, Bill is kind of maybe to attest that he is very much alive and well. North Korean state media releasing these images of Kim Jong-un. He is checking out frontline North Korean troops near the South Korean island of Yeonpyeong. That was the target of a deadly North Korean artillery attack back in 2010. It's right on the maritime border between North and South Korea. Probably, Bill, no coincidence that just in this past week, CIA Director Pompeo was there too, checking out the troops, trying to get a first-hand look at the threat of North Korea, as we all are.
Moscow has said warplanes from the US-led international coalition will not be able to fly over safe zones in Syria, which have been agreed on at international talks in Kazakhstan. The accord on creating so-called de-escalation zones was struck in Astana on Thursday by Russia, Turkey and Iran. The agreement is meant to bring relief to millions of Syrians and encourage refugees to return. But some at this camp in Lebanon said they'd be afraid to enter designated safe areas in their war-torn country. How can I trust these safe areas, he says. If they can't deliver any aid or medicine into besieged areas in Syria, how can I trust them enough to go back into my country and live in a big prison?
There have been reports of Syrian government forces clashing with rebels in the northwestern province of Hama. This shortly after a Russia-led deal to establish safe zones came into force. There was no initial indication of any casualties. Iran and Turkey have backed the plan, but it's not been made public, so its contents are unclear.
The Iraqi army's new push in the battle to recapture Mosul has been hailed as the beginning of the end for the extremist group there. A US-led international coalition's providing air and ground support for the offensive to dislodge the militants. Its spokesman says Iraqi forces' surprise attack from the north means achieving that goal is just a matter of time.
The loss of Mosul is going to deeply damage ISIS prospects. It's the second largest city in Iraq. They had a tremendous amount of prestige, and they were able to collect a lot of taxes and money from the people of Mosul through their brutal control measures. So the loss of this territory is going to be a very big setback for ISIS.
The group's fighters are besieged in the northwestern corner of Mosul, which includes the mosque where leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi declared a caliphate nearly 3 years ago, spanning swathes of Iraq and Syria. Having started the offensive last October, Iraq's army's keen to finish this battle, but up to 500,000 civilians are thought to be still in the area controlled by so-called Islamic State.
According to U.S. officials on Friday, a Navy SEAL was killed and 2 other troops wounded in a raid on an al-Shabaab militant compound in Somalia. The death appears to be the first U.S. combat death in the African country since 1993's Black Hawk Down incident. Pentagon spokesman Captain Jeff Davis said the objective was a compound and a group of people associated with attacks against U.S. Somalia and African Union mission in Somalia peacekeepers. According to U.S. Africa Command, a service member was killed by small arms fire on Thursday while U.S. forces were advising and assisting a Somali National Army operation in Bari, about 40 miles west of the capital, Mogadishu.
Action to counter terrorism. In this drill, frontline officers from Mekong countries are working to curb the movements of terrorists into Southeast Asia amid the increasing likelihood of militants making the journey from the Middle East.
Intelligence shows that the Islamic State group has plans to infiltrate countries in South and Southeast Asia. The Mekong River is an international waterway, so we need to prepare for that.
The Mekong River is also a hotbed for violence and crime. In October 2011, 13 Chinese sailors were killed on the river's steady waters by armed gangsters. Since then, Chinese border control police have worked with their regional counterparts to conduct monthly joint patrols.
There are still many armed groups along the Mekong River. For the moment, we cannot rule out such incidents from happening again. This joint patrol will narrow down the scope of criminals trying to escape after each incident.
The UN Office on Drugs and Crime has warned of a rise in drug trafficking in the Golden Triangle. And out of all the drugs manufactured in the Mekong area, Methamphetamine is the main one.
The countries share the same blessings from the Mekong River. If we work alone, problems will remain and can never be solved. We should work closer together to solve our problems.
The LO handed over the task as in spokesman.
Past their working time here at 8, so we will see how that goes.
Don't see today's next team, the EUC team should receive it as well. And they started to work a little bit more to facilitate the alignment.
The three first person are stable, yeah. And you think they may. There we go.
Este es el primer ejercicio en el que ellos también participan y colaboran con equipos médicos.
No, I don't think they put oxygen. We have limited oxygen resources.
Last-minute campaigning on the last day of this presidential campaign. Emmanuel Macron, the 39-year-old former banker and centrist independent candidate, visited a cathedral in southwestern France. And at another cathedral in east-central France, his far-right opponent Marine Le Pen. Both candidates vying for the Catholic supporters of former Prime Minister François Fillon, who dropped out of the race in the first round.
Mr. Macron is the candidate of the elites. He is the candidate of the oligarchy. He is the candidate of the big private interests.
Where is the anger of the French people coming from? From the collective inefficiency? Ms. Le Pen is the spokeswoman of nothing. She exploits anger and hatred.
Opinion polls out on Friday do seem to be tilting towards Emmanuel Macron, widening his lead to more than 20%. This is Le Figaro, France's most conservative newspaper. The headline reads, "After Le Pen's shipwreck, Macron arch favourite." But at her campaign headquarters on Friday morning, Marine Le Pen made it clear she wasn't giving up.
I think victory is within reach, and the media are pretending not to hear the social anger that exists in our country, which is going to be expressed through the polls on Sunday.
Lunch with military spouses, church with relatives of shooting victims, and dinner with families in Ohio. These sound like the perfect pit stops for any wannabe American presidential candidate. There are also just a few of the trips Facebook CEO Mark Zuckerberg has made in recent months, which each being publicized on Facebook, usually accompanied with a comment about how much Zuck learned about his country along the way. Then this week,
Facebook founder Mark Zuckerberg surprised people in Michiana as he stopped in South Bend today to spend some time with Mayor Pete Buttigieg. The two even drove around and posted their conversation on Facebook Live. The mayor cruised around with Zuckerberg as he pointed out some local landmarks on the drive. They chatted about current issues in South Bend, such as business development and problems like opioid addiction. Zuckerberg previously made stops in Ohio and Detroit.
Yes, Zuckerberg paid a visit to the mayor of South Bend, Indiana, a rising star in the Democratic Party who himself ran for chairman of the Democratic National Committee, losing to Tom Perez earlier this year. And if you're concerned a nerdy tech CEO couldn't handle the role of leader of the free world, Zuck's worked to quell your anxiety there too. He wants you to know he's an avid student of international relations, posting back in 2015 about his experience reading Henry Kissinger's book, World Order. declaring, quote, "It's about foreign relations and how we can build peaceful relationships throughout the world. This is important for creating the world we want for our children, and that's what I'm thinking about these days."
With spring comes the beginning of the threat of the mosquito-borne Zika virus in Texas. 18 pregnant women in the Rio Grande Valley have already been infected with the virus this year, which has been linked to birth defects such as microcephaly. Of the 18 women, 2 have given birth to babies with microcephaly, 7 babies appear normal, and 9 pregnancies are ongoing. In the Rio Grande Valley, it's hard to tell where someone may have contracted the Zika virus, since so many residents are traveling back and forth between Mexico and Texas. So far, there is no vaccine for the virus.
In rural Brazil, an outbreak of yellow fever that began in December is considered the largest in 14 years. CNN has reported that residents began shooting and beating monkeys to death after the deaths of 11 yellow fever patients in the small town of Ladainha. Roberto Alves, manager of the Vectorially Transmitted Illnesses Technical Vigilance Unit at Brazil's health ministry, is tracking the outbreak and explained that the death of a primate is an event of mandatory notification to health services. Paul Allen Garber, executive editor of the American Journal of Primatology, said what's happening is people are killing howler monkeys because they're afraid they're going to catch, or their kids are going to catch, disease from these monkeys. Howler monkeys do not transmit yellow fever virus. It is transmitted through mosquitoes. In fact, the monkeys are highly sensitive to the disease, the most vulnerable of all the primates in Brazil.
Now to an unbelievable sight out of Galveston this evening. Hundreds of beautiful migratory birds dead after flying through the island. And this all happened in just one night?
After flying some 600 miles across the Gulf of Mexico, these migrating birds finally reached land, only to slam into a skyscraper. Employees at the American National Insurance Company in Galveston made the sad discovery this morning: 395 dead birds on the ground outside their office. The Houston Audubon Society believes last night's bad weather likely forced the flock lower to the ground. And they say bright building lights can disorient the birds, a combination that caused the feathered creatures to take their final flight right into this 23-story tower.
Administrators to turn those lights out, not only to save energy, but it's less of an attraction for these migratory birds so that they can avoid these collisions.
Josh Henderson of the Galveston Police Department took these pictures of the dead migratory birds, which included mostly warblers and orioles. They'll be collected and studied to prevent more large bird kills.
How's this for a household pet? The world's largest rodent? How about snuggling up to this monster? And can you imagine this little creature flying around your house? Forget about Fido and Kitty. Truly exotic household pets are a growing phenomenon. That giant rat, his name is Chico. He's actually a capybara, as well as Jackie Wren's beloved pet.
He takes big chunks out of there. We had to put up a privacy fence because even with people that were driving through would see him and slam on the brakes. And we thought, we don't want any accidents out there.
Chico's got the run of her house in Texarkana, Arkansas, and even jumps into bed with her to watch TV. Popcorn is his favorite snack. And when the grandkids come over, he jumps in the pool with them.
He swims, he dives, he has webbed feet.
The care for the giant rat-like pet has taken over Jackie's life.
You're on your feet 24/7, and he's nocturnal. So he gets me up at least 4 times a night to be fed.
Come on, Bruce. Dave Durham calls his rhino iguana as if she was a dog. You can't think of a better pet than Bruce, who, by the way, is a girl.
The reason how come her name is Bruce is because when they're small, you can't hardly tell if they're boy or girl.
Bruce likes to cuddle with his owner.
These make very good pets, and I think they're a better pet than a dog, really.
And mind you, he says that in front of his dog.
They do jump, and some people do get nervous about that.
These ladies can't think of better pets than sugar gliders. That's what these marsupials from Australia are called. Look at them go. When Amy Waxman heard about sugar gliders, she was hooked. People carry them around in cute little purses.
I spend most of my day with them between feeding and making sure their cage is clean, their toys are clean, making pouches for them.
The gliders roam all over.
Let's see if we'll come out this way, come out that way.
Each of these owners told us they can't imagine life without their beloved